All
Hey,
right.
man.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. Thank you to
Yeah.
Omer and Elad for having me. My name is Justin. I work at Red Light Management, where I oversee marketing and digital strategy for the electronic department. So for those who are not familiar, Red Light Management is a global management company. We have offices in New York, LA, Nashville, London. We're all over the place. We represent something like 250 to 300 artists. And I work specifically with our dance music department, which is artists like Duke Dumont, Corella, Grizz, Bonobo, Odessa, the list goes on. So very excited to be here. Before I was at a company called Wavo. Wavo is a music marketing agency. While I was there, I worked on advertising campaigns primarily for clients like Atlantic Records, Interscope, Warner Brother Records, as well as a lot of independent musicians. And like Omer said, prior to that, I was an artist manager myself. So if any of you are managers, I've been in your shoes. I know what it's like to try and break an artist. So I'm excited to be talking with you guys today.
Yeah, and it's very exciting to have you also, Justin. Just for whoever joined us, Justin DeMarco here from Red Light Management, who is going to talk in the next hour about planning out your digital marketing strategy. The way this will work, you can feel free to ask any questions below. You should have an ask a question button. And also, as mentioned earlier, you can feel free to book a one-on-one consulting session with us right after this webinar, actually. So feel free to do so. And Justin, I think I'm going to give you the stage.
All right, great. So I have a little presentation set up for you guys. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me a second here. Let's see. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Just a moment. All right, great. So what I'm going to start talking about here, so the gist of this presentation is primarily on digital advertising, but I do want to set a bit of context on sort of marketing artists in general before we kind of dig into the specifics about advertising. So one thing I want to talk about is something I'm calling the fan development lifecycle. So when a fan discovers a new artist, they go through a sort of specific process of, learning who the artist is, engaging with them, deepening kind of the relationship with the artist before being in a context where they're going to be willing to buy a ticket or buy merch from the artist. And so that process is essentially discovery, which might be something like hearing a song on the radio, finding an article with an artist, hearing a song in a playlist, maybe even a TikTok campaign. And so, before you can get to a point where you're ready to buy a ticket, ready to buy merch, you have to obviously discover the artist. But you also have to increase the level of engagement with that artist. So there's a process that sort of fans go through where they learn who the artist is. Maybe they follow them on social media. They sort of learn what the story of the artist is. They build a connection, and that's really, really important. We always talk about authenticity in the music industry, about sort of storytelling. We talk about content, and all these things help fans and artists build a connection together. And so for them to reach the stage where they're ready to buy a ticket or buy merch from that artist or buy an album, sort of the typical super fan stuff that we talk about, they have to go through that engagement process. And so in order, to have effective advertising, I think it's important to keep this process in mind. You can't just sort of expect people who hear about an artist for the first time to go in and then, pre-order the album. There has to be kind of a cycle that happens. And so that should be something that you guys are keeping in mind whenever you're executing any marketing. Go to the next slide. And I'll obviously feel free to ask questions. I don't have the chat box here, but Omar, if there's any questions in the chat that people are asking, feel free to interrupt me at any time, and I'm happy to dig into that.
Sure thing.
So, given that this is sort of the fan development cycle that we just talked about, one of the big problems that I see with how musicians and managers execute their digital advertising is that they focus too much on discovery. So that means, essentially advertising to new people who've never heard of the artist before, or they focus too much on the conversion aspect, and they try and convert people who haven't been sort of warmed up by going through that engagement process. The other thing that I see, sort of a common mistake that people make is that they focus too much on what I'm calling like short-term metrics. So this could be things like your cost per click, or your cost per view, but not thinking about, who is the person who's clicking on that link? Are they making it to the next step in your funnel? So if you are familiar with sort of link shortener services like Linkfire or FFM or Foundy, you have the ability to look into their analytics at what happens once somebody reaches that link. And what I've found in my experience working at Wavo, working at Redlight, is that people who hit those links have a very high bounce rate. And what that means is that when you get onto, let's say you see a Facebook ad, you click on it, it loads a link fire where you then have the option to go to Spotify, Apple Music, and so on. You'll have a very high bounce rate, meaning people will not go to the next step in that funnel. And I think it's very important to look at those analytics, because if you're focused only on driving traffic to that link fire, you might be wasting your advertising dollars because people are not actually making it to the next step. So the sort of solution to this problem is to focus more on brand marketing, and we're going to go into that a little bit more, but focus more on brand marketing and audience management in order to help move people through that funnel from the discovery process to engagement to eventually converting them. So let's go into the next slide. So the old view, which some of you guys might be familiar with, is you might have an ad and you try and drive people to Spotify or to Apple directly from that ad. What happens is you get people who are bouncing. Like I've just mentioned before, people will click on the ad, it'll take them to Linkfire, they'll realize they have to click again, and then they'll just close out of the page. So you essentially lost that opportunity to make a connection with that fan who might be encountering you for the first time, or they've encountered you before, but they bounced. What we ended up doing at Wavo when I was there, realizing that this was a big problem, we'd have maybe 10 or 15% of people who made it to Linkfire who then made it to Spotify, and who knows how many of those people actually ended up streaming the song. So what we shifted to is a model of advertising that focused more on essentially building a connection at what we call the first point of contact. So that would be directly on Facebook, directly on Instagram, directly on YouTube. You would get people to engage with the song, engage with the artist while they're in their social media platforms, and not sort of expect them to go through 2 or 3 more steps in order to actually engage with the artist. And so we shifted a lot of our campaign objectives towards sort of video views instead of traffic and clicks. And what that ended up doing is you get people who listen to the song, even though it's a short clip, they listen to the song directly within Instagram or within Facebook, and they get to sort of experience and connect with that artist in those platforms. And eventually that is going to lead to more engagement with the artist, higher awareness, and down the line, that is what's going to drive more streams. So it's a bit of a shift in how we think about it, but it sort of takes into account what typical sort of user behavior on those platforms is like. And I think one way to think about this that's helpful is to think about the way that you interact with any ads for music that you might see on those platforms. I know from my own personal experience, I'll sometimes see an ad, I'll click on it, and then you know what? The next page is taking too long to load, and I just click out. So when we think about how we interact with ads ourselves on those platforms, it's helpful to think about how that will change your strategy down the line. And so by switching to a context that's a bit more focused on building up the brand and building up awareness for the artist, that's how you're able to move people through that funnel that we discussed a bit earlier. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about brand building and what sort of a good brand is. And brand building really starts with trust. There's so much content out there. There's so much music out there. I'm sure you've heard of the term information overload. We're kind of living in an age where there's content sort of hitting us across all these channels all the time. And so in order for us sort of to decide to allocate our finite attention to a new artist that we've never heard of or to a new song, there has to be a certain level of trust that this time that I'm spending discovering this new artist is actually going to be worthwhile. It's not going to be wasted. And so as consumers, there's sort of little ways that we develop trust for things that we might not be familiar with. The first is familiarity. So we trust things that we've seen a lot before, and so that might mean if I've never heard an artist's name and it pops up in my feed, I might skip over it. But if I keep seeing that artist, across articles on the internet, across social media posts, it's showing up in playlists, that name starts to become familiar to me, and I might be more willing to give that artist a chance and actually listen to that artist. And so advertising can play a role in that sort of building up familiarity process by exposing potential audiences to our artists repeatedly over a set period of time. So because that sort of familiarity is so important, it's very, very important to have sort of processes in place where you can track the audiences that you're trying to engage with. Because what happens otherwise is you're only sort of reaching new people every time. That's sort of the mistake that I alluded to earlier, when you're too focused on the discovery process and not moving fans through that funnel, going through engagement to eventually lead to conversion. If you have read any marketing sort of literature, you might be familiar with a term called the rule of 7. It's kind of like it's a general guideline. It's not a rule that's set in stone, but it essentially says that in order to consider a new brand, people have to be exposed to that brand at least 7 times. And so that's, it's a good guideline to keep in mind as you're trying to build up an audience and build familiarity, build awareness with your artist. It's going to take a repeat exposure to that artist in order for people to give that artist a chance and try and listen to them. And so advertising is one way to build out that familiarity. But there's many other ways in your overarching marketing strategy, including, like I mentioned earlier, press and social media content, radio. Everything that kind of fits into your marketing mix plays a role in that. Advertising is another way to kind of inject yourself into that process. The next thing I want to talk about is something called costly signaling. It sounds like a bit of a abstract term, but what essentially it means, it's a term that comes from the world of evolutionary biology, and it's kind of been applied to advertising in recent years. And costly signaling is this idea that there are some animals in the world that have features that aren't necessarily useful, but because they have those features, because they're sort of expensive biological features to have, like huge horns, or birds with very elaborate sort of feathers, that can signal to other mates that they have the resources to build up these elaborate features that aren't that useful, but kind of signal, hey, I have all these resources. I'm viable for reproduction. And in advertising, the way that this has been applied is when you look at big brands that have these expensive TV campaigns that don't really say anything about the product, but what it does tell people is that they have the money to spend on these expensive campaigns. And so if a brand has millions of dollars to go spend on a television campaign, that brand is probably more trustworthy than a brand you've never heard of. So when you go to the store, the one that you're more likely to choose is that brand that has spent all this money on expensive television campaigns. So the way to apply that to music is, if I've never heard of an artist, but they have a music video that looks super well produced and expensive, then that tells me, oh, this artist has some money behind them. They have a team. They're serious. They're a professional artist that is maybe more worth spending some time with than an artist that doesn't have all these things. We could say the same about the production for your live show. If it looks like a lot of work has been put into the production for your live show, then that tells me, okay, this is a serious artist that has something to say. So that's another way of building trust. It's sort of just a signal that people use in order to quickly decide, is this artist worth spending some time with? And then the last one that I want to go over is something called building trust by association, or reputational risk. And what that means is that other people are putting their reputation on the line in order to back your project. And because they're putting their reputation on the line, that is essentially a signal, hey, this artist is sort of trustworthy. I can spend some time with this artist. So what that might look like in sort of real terms is, a media outlet that has a great reputation for sharing new music from great musicians. And so if they decide to write about you, they're putting their reputation on the line that this is a good artist that's worthwhile. Or a radio station that decides to play your new song. They have a finite amount of space and finite amount of music that they can play in the day. They have a reputation that they've built over many, many years of playing good music. And so people trust that if they play something, it's going to be good. Same thing for, a promoter or a festival promoter that has, a great reputation. If they decide to put you on the lineup, that is them, sort of signaling, hey, this artist is worth listening to. And so all of these things help sort of fans who are overloaded with information decide, okay, I'm going to allocate my attention to, this artist. So advertising can be used in this process to build familiarity, to highlight the costly things that you're doing, and make sure that people see it. So, if you have an expensive music video that you spent a lot of time working on, well, make sure that you're advertising that so that people can see, okay, this person is, a serious musician that has a reputation that they're putting on the line. The trust by association one, I think, is interesting. One of the strategies that we would sometimes use when I was at Wavo was to, if there's a great piece of press from like a reputable outlet, let's say, Rolling Stone wrote about you or Pitchfork wrote about you, you would advertise that article itself not just send people, to your new song, but send people to the article. And that shows people that other people are putting their reputation on the line. These trustworthy sources are writing about you, and that's a great way to build trust with fans who might not have heard about you. I know this might be a little bit abstract. Are there any questions here that people might have that I can help answer?
Justin, I think I'll jump in here. Can you hear me?
Yep, yep.
Cool. I'm just curious about the last thing that you just said.
Mhm.
Gave the Rolling Stone example, and it's kind of like really, a lot of times artists ask us if blogs are even are still something that you should invest in. The same in the same context, also like Spotify playlist pitching. It's like one campaign can kind of give you a good boost of streams, but then like it's again like you're saying, it's kind of like an effort of brand building. So
Mhm.
even if those things fade away or they feel like a one-time thing, I think the biggest role that they have is how they're combined together and what they look like, how it makes you look like in a year from today or in 2 years from today, when all of your I don't know, songs on Spotify already have a certain amount of listens, or you have a bunch of different blogs that have been writing about you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really, really good point. There's always a question about how to sort of invest your budget, and hiring a publicist, hiring PR can be expensive. And to be honest, it won't always lead to a ton of streams. The thing that it does do is that it helps establish you with people who have a reputation on the line. It helps build your brand. It helps build that trust. And I think that for that reason, PR is super, super important. I'm sure we've all seen artists, have that have done well on playlists. But then you go check out their social media and they have almost no followers. They have a hard time selling tickets, even though they might have millions of streams on Spotify because they landed in a couple big playlists. And part of the reason is that I think they skipped some of those steps of building a brand, building engagement, building sort of a reputation. And PR and press is still very important for that reason. um, and
So
so
so you're
go ahead.
the I'm trying to kind of like what I understand from what you're saying, among other stuff, is that like it's initially artists shouldn't expect like an immediate result from a PR agent or from a blog post. It's more of a ongoing thing, which I mean, it sounds very obvious, but I feel like today more and more musicians and artists are more about the immediate responses. And it's kind of like I think maybe being patient with that, and like it will serve you eventually, but kind of like building stone over stone, like you said, also your social and also your Spotify plays, and like it all has to come together. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very hard to skip any steps in this process. Like I've been in music for a long time now. And it's very, few and far between the artists who just kind of rocket ship up,
Mhm.
and are able to skip some of those steps. And I think a lot of people see those success stories and think that's the way it happens. But even at Red Light, a lot of the artists that we manage have been professional active musicians for 10 plus years. Like it takes a long time. Um, and they're starting to reap sort of the rewards of all that work years and years later. And so it just takes time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the reality that is important for people to recognize, that you have to build a reputation, you have to build a brand, and like you said, it's stone over stone. um,
I think that's this is also a good segue to one of the questions here. how does a new artist really cultivate a true fan base on a limited budget? Maybe that's something that you'll get into later, but it's one of the questions here.
How does an artist cultivate? So it depends what you're trying to use your budget towards. There's if you have a limited budget, you have to kind of decide, where am I going to spend this money and how is it going to be as effective as possible. If we go back to that the fan development life cycle I mentioned earlier, where there's discovery, engagement, and conversion. And so if you think about, that process, there's sort of two ways that you can go about it. You can try and increase the number of people that go through that discovery process, or you can try and increase the sort of conversion of each person to the next step. So if you have a smaller number of fans who are starting at that discovery process, you want to make sure that every single fan that discovers you tries to go to the next step by building a connection with them. So that might mean things like, replying to every single person that follows you and trying to build a personal connection with them. It might mean creating content so that if somebody does discover you, there's more to your story than just, the latest EP or the latest song that you put out. Maybe you put out a video about your songwriting process. Write a story about what inspired you to make some music, break down how you created the track. Q&As, for example, are a good way to build that connection on a deeper level. So there's no one size fits all for these things, but if you think about what that process looks like for each person, to go from sort of a new light fan to a super fan, you have to look at like what's working for you, what's most effective, and double down on those things, so that anybody new who's discovering you is going to convert at a higher rate, but also that you're bringing more people into your funnel, through things like advertising, through things like content creation, press, and so on. Are we good to move to the next section?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, we can address the next question afterwards. I think let's continue and then we can take a look at
Sure.
the other
Okay,
questions.
so this is, like I said, this is it's a marketing discussion, but we're kind of focusing a little bit more on advertising. And so I want to give a quick overview of all of the advertising platforms that are available online for music advertising. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with these. Most people are probably familiar with Facebook and Instagram stories. It's kind of like the entry point for digital advertising because their platform is so sort of user friendly. But I just want to give some quick notes on each one, so that you can have these in mind. I know people also often have questions about some of the newer platforms as well, and if it's worth investing in some of those. So if you have a bit of information, that might help you when you're setting up your next campaign. So Facebook and Instagram, they have extremely great targeting features. The cost per clicks are pretty low compared to other platforms. One of the problems with Facebook and Instagram feed is you can get a lot of what's called empty clicks. So those are essentially just people who click on stuff. Like, there's a certain subset of users on Facebook and Instagram that will just click on a lot of things in their newsfeed, but they don't actually, take a look at what is showing up in the next tab or what's being opened. So that's something to keep in mind. I mentioned earlier the shift from traffic campaigns to video views campaigns. This is kind of like a way to mitigate that. And the reason I have Facebook, Instagram, and Instagram stories separated as two separate sort of platforms here is that there are two different formats. Facebook and Instagram are a feed that you kind of scroll through, whereas Instagram Stories is a full video that takes up your entire screen. And so from a sort of user experience, those are two different ways of engaging with ads. So when I create Facebook and Instagram campaigns, I tend to put Facebook and Instagram newsfeed into one campaign and put Instagram Stories into a separate campaign. Facebook is good at sort of optimizing. So if you put them all together and you have a goal of clicks, for example, well, because Facebook and Instagram feed tend more towards clicks, all of your impressions will go into that into those formats, and you won't get many impressions on Instagram Stories. But like I said, Instagram Stories is the full screen. It's high quality video that takes up your entire screen. It's great for building awareness. So I like to separate those so that I still have that aspect of awareness building, even though the click might be a little bit more expensive. Snapchat. So let's talk a bit about Snapchat. Snapchat is similar to Instagram Stories in that it's like a full screen. It's great for building brand awareness. One thing that I really like about Snapchat is that it is sound on by default. And what that means is that when an ad plays, the music and sound will play from your phone automatically. That's not the case with Facebook, Instagram, and Instagram Stories. The sound is off by default, and the person has to tap onto the ad in order to hear what's playing. Now that's a little bit problematic if you're advertising music, so that's something to keep in mind. Your Facebook and Instagram Stories ads will probably have about 50% of people that are not listening with sound on. So that's why it can be important to have text on your creative that tells people, the artist name, the song, the fact that, the music is out now, things like that. But what's great about Snapchat is the sound is on by default. So that's 100% of people who are listening to your ad will actually hear the music, which is great. Snapchat, the targeting is not as strong as on Instagram and Facebook. The targeting is a little bit more general. So you can target pop music fans or rock fans or people who like concerts and festivals, but you can't break down into individual artists like you can on Facebook and Instagram. So Snapchat is good for sort of awareness building and that sort of discovery aspect that we talked about earlier. If you're trying to reach a wide audience, introduce people to your music. It's not as good if you're trying to retarget people or really go after a similar artist audience. YouTube is the next one we're going to talk about. YouTube I love for music videos. So those are the way we advertise music videos is using something called the in-stream ad. So that's the ad that plays before you watch a video on YouTube. And the great thing about those ads is that you only pay if somebody watches 30 seconds or more. And when they do that, those views count towards your original music video. So let's say I'm advertising, I have one of my artists has a new music video. I'm advertising that video. I can use the full music video as an ad, and it will play before somebody watches a video by a similar artist or a channel that I've chosen. And if they watch more than 30 seconds, they are going to be listening to my song. They're going to be watching the music video, and those views are going to count towards my original music video. Now, the thing that's important to keep in mind with that is, you also often get sort of passive listeners who might be, maybe listening to a playlist on YouTube, and they think, this video is just sort of another song in that playlist. So they're not as engaged as somebody that will click on the ad and then watch the video. And so one way to kind of adjust for that sort of reality is to use discovery ads. Discovery ads are when you have like a recommended video on the side. You might have seen there's like a little yellow tag that says ad. And then somebody will click on that video and then they'll watch sort of in the original page. So I like to use a combination of both. The in-stream ads help increase the views, help sort of get people to listen to the song very, very cheaply. You can generally get views for, somewhere between 2 and 4 cents per view. And then discovery ads is to get that more sort of engaged fan. The last one I want to talk about for YouTube is bumper ads. So those are the 6-second ads that you can't skip. The person has to watch the full ad in order to watch the video that they were intending to watch originally. Those, because it's only 6 seconds, you're not going to use that for like a music video or something like that. But those are great for building awareness. So if you can put together like a really creative, engaging asset that says, new album out now or something like that, that's a really good way of building awareness and building that sort of frequency with your target audience. I like those especially if the artist is a bit more established. If they're not that established, and people don't have that same familiarity with the name, it might not be as effective. But if they are established, if they have a name, it's a really, really great way of building awareness and getting a lot of impressions in front of people, for very cheap. The other two that are part of like the Google family, Google Display, Google Search. I'm not the biggest fan of Google Display. That's sort of the banner ads that you see online. I think people have been conditioned to ignore those. So they're not that effective. But, if you have a big budget and it's a really high priority artist and you just want to have visibility across the internet, it can be a good way of sort of, following people around the internet and not just targeting them when they're on their social platforms. But as a way to sort of drive streams and drive clicks, it's kind of expensive. So I would steer clear of that. Search is really good for shows. That's kind of it. If people are searching for tickets for a certain show or searching, is this artist on tour? Google search can be really, really effective because your search ad will show up as a top result on Google. A couple other ones here that are a bit newer. TikTok. So TikTok is sort of rolling out their ad platform right now. I don't have a ton of experience with TikTok ads. Just want to put that out there. They've only had an ad platform for about a year now. It's mostly just dark ads. But from what I understand, the CPMs are very, very low. So that means that essentially to reach the same number of people on TikTok, Snapchat, or let's say Instagram stories, TikTok is going to be one of the cheapest. So that can be very good. The targeting is still very general. You're not going to be able to reach, very specific audiences like you can on Facebook and Instagram. And what works on TikTok might not work on other platforms. So for TikTok, you might want to focus a little bit more on sort of organic content, user-generated content, not the same kind of like professionally made videos that might work better on Instagram. So I think similar to Snapchat, it's a good way of building awareness, reaching a lot of people for very cheap. But if you want to have a very targeted campaign, maybe focus more on Instagram stories in that sort of vertical video format. The next one is Spotify. So Spotify has audio ads, they have video ads. They also have the Spotify Marquee, which is a new product that they launched in the last few months. So audio ads is the one that's been around for the longest. Anybody who's on the free tier of Spotify gets an ad, at sort of a regular interval while they're listening to music. It can be a great way, because of the targeting, it can be a really, really great way to reach listeners who might have listened to you, say 3 to 6 months ago, but haven't listened to you in a recent time. I've seen people use Spotify audio ads as a way to build up their following on Spotify before they have a release. And actually what we did with one of our artists on a recent campaign, which has been really interesting, is we previewed their new song, their unreleased song, as a Spotify audio ad, and sort of encourage people to follow that artist in order to hear the full song when it dropped. So there's creative ways of using Spotify audio ads. The one thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that it's only reaching people in the free tier of Spotify, which means that they're not paying $10 a month or whatever it is for their subscription. And if that person is not willing to pay $10 a month for their music, are they going to be willing to buy a ticket to your show down the line, or buy some merch? So that's just something to keep in mind. Some artists are trying to reach the biggest audience possible, and they have sort of maybe more of a top 40, kind of mainstream sound, where the goal is really to build the widest audience possible, and so that will make sense for them. But some artists might have a bit more of a niche sound where they have a smaller audience, and they're trying to get people to buy expensive merch, buy vinyl, buy tickets to shows. And so maybe for those kinds of artists, Spotify audio ads are not the best fit. Spotify Marquee is a really interesting product that they launched earlier this year. I've used it with a few artists, and it's been quite successful. What it is when somebody is on Spotify and an artist uses the Marquee feature, it'll basically show the user a pop-up saying, this artist has a new album out now, and you can click on that and go directly to the album. This product goes towards paid users as well, and the targeting options are very interesting and similar to audio. You can target what they call lapsed listeners, so somebody might have listened to you a few months ago but hasn't listened to you in a while. And the thing that I like about it is the people who end up clicking on that and then streaming your new song or your new album actually end up listening to the artist quite a bit. Some of the campaign results that we've seen show, for example, somebody who didn't listen to that artist in the past 6 months but had listened to them 6+ months ago ended up streaming something like 17 or 20 songs from that artist in this sort of 2-week period after they saw the Marquee ad. So it's a great way to re-engage some people who might have been listening to you previously. It is pretty expensive. If I remember correctly, the minimums are around $3,000. So we've been only using those on sort of album campaigns when there's a big sort of splash that we're trying to make. It's not sort of the go-to thing on every single campaign. Any questions?
Yeah, I think we have here a couple questions. So I'm going to go with one on the bottom. So how do I set up a way for consumers to simply buy downloads without them jumping through so many hoops?
Well, that's a bit difficult. So first of all, you have to know that people don't really download much music nowadays. Obviously downloads before streaming used to be kind of the go-to. If you're only focused on downloads, I would, it depends. Are you using Bandcamp? Are you using iTunes? Is it Beatport? I would try and familiarize your fan base with downloads. Make sort of explain why downloads are important for the artist in your sort of social media content, the way that you tweet and in your newsletter. Because if you're just trying to drive people to a download store without any context, because most people are streaming music nowadays, they might just sort of jump off. So, I would try and familiarize your fan base with downloads, why those are important, what they mean to you as an artist, and sort of set the context. From there, we're gonna be talking a bit about audience management and sort of tracking your core fan base in a bit. But it's really sort of your core fans who are going to be downloading your music. It's not somebody who's only heard of you for the first time. So I'd make sure that if you're running ads to encourage downloads, that those be focused on your core fan base that you've already familiarized with downloads. And these are people that have been following you for a while. They have a lot of familiarity, a lot of trust. And if you're focused on downloads, let's say your place of choice is Bandcamp, I would send people directly to Bandcamp. Don't make them go through another step where they have to choose between Bandcamp and iTunes and Apple. If they know that your platform of choice is Bandcamp, they know how important downloads are, just drive them to Bandcamp. And that's kind of what I would suggest in those situations. But keep in mind that people are not downloading a lot of music nowadays. But it can be possible, and for some artists it's very effective, but I think it requires kind of a communication with your fan base to let them know, hey, this is something that's important as an artist because X, Y, and Z.
Great. And also, as for audience management, which you said you're going to touch on in a few minutes, I think that's also relevant for the question: how do we set up an e-commerce funnel as a new artist, where when we spend ad dollars, we can make a return?
Yep.
So going back to those that segmented core audience of your super fans. I think that will answer your question. By the way, I saw you scheduled. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but I saw you scheduled a session afterwards, and we can definitely discuss that. So, Justin, back to you.
All right. So I'm just going over a couple key terms here. These are just general advertising terms that you might encounter that are important to understand. Impressions. So an impression is anytime that your ad is shown to somebody. Doesn't mean that they watched it. It doesn't mean that they engaged with it. It just means that the ad popped up on their screen, whether they noticed it or not. So that's kind of like the one of the most basic advertising terms is impressions. When you're thinking about an ad campaign, okay, how many impressions did I get? How many times did my ad show up in front of fans? Frequency, this is the number of times on average that each person saw your ad. So if we go back a little bit to what I was discussing earlier in terms of familiarity, that rule of 7 that I mentioned, making sure that you're getting in front of people at a sort of high enough frequency that you're building familiarity is very important. You could have 100,000 impressions and 100,000 different people saw the ad. Or you could have 100,000 impressions and you have 30,000 roughly people that saw the ad, and the frequency is about 3. So in that case, each person who saw the ad was exposed to it 3 times. And so, then you're starting to build familiarity with those people. There's no sort of hard and fast rule about what the ideal frequency is, but I think it's just a metric to sort of keep in mind as you're trying to move people from discovery to engagement to conversion. You're going to want to build up a certain level of frequency so that they're familiar with you as an artist. CPM is a really important one that I think doesn't get discussed enough. It's very important to understand sort of the costs that are involved with the results that you're getting in your campaign. So CPM means cost per mil. It's essentially the cost per 1,000 impressions. And that's like sort of the baseline metric of cost for advertising online. How much does it cost you to reach 1,000 people on Facebook versus 1,000 people on Snapchat versus 1,000 people on TikTok? Those prices are all going to be different because all these platforms work on an auction basis. So it just means that a lot of people are bidding for impressions, and if there's a lot of competition for specific keywords or specific audiences, the CPM is going to go up. So it means that it's going to be more expensive to reach 1,000 people because there's a lot of other advertisers who are trying to reach that same audience. Snapchat and TikTok have lower CPMs than Instagram. That means that you can reach 1,000 people for less than you would pay on Facebook and Instagram, because Facebook and Instagram have sort of they have more advertisers, they have a more developed platform. Snapchat and TikTok have fewer advertisers, but they also have a lot of ad inventory. So because of that, it's costing a little bit less to reach people on those platforms. CTR, so that's the click-through rate. So that is the percentage of people that click on an ad divided by, or the number of people that click on an ad divided by the number of people that saw the ad. So again, that can be a really important metric for performance. Sometimes the cost per click can be a little bit, can sort of throw you off, because if you have a really expensive audience where the CPM is very high, but you have a good click-through rate, you might still have a relatively high cost per click. And it doesn't mean your ad is not performing well. It just means that audience was expensive to reach. The CPM was high. So I like click-through rate as a sort of gauge to see how my ad is performing, because the cost per click, like I said, could be very high or very low depending on how expensive the audience was. But the click-through rate tells me, basically what percentage of people were actually interested in this and went on to the next step. Cost per click, I touched on briefly. Literally the number of clicks divided by your budget. That's the cost per click. It can throw you off, if you have a really, really cheap audience, if you're advertising in a place where it's not very costly to reach people. For example, Mexico, South America, India, these places you can reach a lot of people for not a lot of money. So you might have a really, really low cost per click. But is that actually driving kind of the results that you're looking for? Whereas if you advertise to a small core audience, or maybe even just a specific city in North America or in Europe, those places are a little bit more expensive to advertise. So your cost per click might be higher, but maybe that's the fan that you're trying to reach, and so you're okay with that higher cost per click. CPV, cost per view. So similar to cost per click, it's what is the cost of one view divided by your budget. VTR is something that comes up a little bit more on YouTube ads. So that's the view through rate, and so that is the percentage of people who watch 30 seconds or more of your video, like I spoke about on those YouTube ads, divided by the number of people that were shown the ad in the first place. So this is just some key terms. It's important to kind of keep these metrics in mind, because there's a story behind every single one of those metrics. And when you're evaluating the results of your campaign, you have to kind of keep that story in mind and understand, what does this mean, and sort of how does it relate to my bigger goals. And so it's not just a measure of, okay, this is what the number says, and this is good or bad because this number says this. It's what does this number mean? How is it calculated? And is it good or bad based on sort of the additional context behind those numbers? So I just wanted to give a quick overview of those terms. Next, we're going to get into audience management. And this is something that's really, really important, because of what we discussed earlier about, moving fans through that funnel, through discovery, engagement, conversion. Somebody asked a question about merchandise, and I'll touch a bit on it here. The reason why audience management is so important is that it is the way that you can track fans for the long term and re-engage them repeatedly over the course of not just your marketing campaign, but really your career as an artist. It's how you build long-term relationship with fans. It's how you increase the long-term value of those fans. And to give sort of an example of why this is so important, when I was at Wavo, one of our clients was Above and Beyond. They're a big electronic music act, and they have their artist project. They have a couple of labels that they run as well, and their team was very, very good about tracking their audiences. They had a well-developed email list. They had pixels placed in all the right places. And repeatedly over time, they were able to grow these audiences of fans that they were actually tracking. And so when it came time to hit that conversion aspect, we ran a big campaign with them. They had a festival that they did in Southern California. And so when it went time to get tickets on sale, they had this huge audience of people that had engaged with new music, engaged with merch, watched their videos, and they knew who all these people were. And so when it came time to advertising tickets for that festival, they were able to move tickets very, very quickly. We saw a high number of tickets from people in those audiences, and they ended up selling, very quickly. I think the work required to sell those tickets was a lot less than it would have been in a situation where you had to reach new fans entirely and try and figure out, okay, where are these people who like this band? They had tracked all these people for a long time before that, and so they were able to move tickets quickly because of that. 88 Rising is another example of that. They're a client that we worked with. They're a hip hop collective that focuses on artists with an Asian background. And similarly, we were running campaigns for all their new releases, albums, singles from the artists on their roster, merch campaigns. And so we had all this fan data that had been aggregated over a long period of time. And so when it came time to make that conversion request, when they had their festival, we already had an audience of people that we knew were very engaged with this brand, very engaged with the artists on the roster. And so it was a lot easier to convert those fans to a festival ticket than it would have been if we were trying to find new fans right from the get-go. With my own roster right now at Red Light, other examples of this are, we had an artist called Pluko. He just put out a vinyl record of his album that came out in the spring. Because we've been tracking his audiences throughout the entire album campaign, by the time we put out the vinyl, we had an audience of people who had engaged with previous singles, had engaged with the album, had engaged with merch before that. So, these were people that we knew would be interested in the vinyl, and we were actually able to move a lot of units at a very low cost just because we had that audience built up. So audience management is very, very important. I'm going to go into some of the details, some of the data sources that you can work with. The first one that you hear a lot about is email. Email is super important. You always hear about building up your email list. The reason why it's so important is that, there's no intermediary with an email. It's, data source that you control. You can communicate directly with fans. The other thing that's great about email is you can then upload those audiences into the platforms that we discussed earlier. Not all of them, but a lot of them allow you to upload your email lists and create audiences out of those emails. So you can create Facebook ads that target your email list. You can create Snapchat ads that target your email list. And so, you're able to have that sort of repeat exposure across different platforms to an audience that is very, very engaged and very interested in you as an artist. And that makes, the sort of conversion aspect of when you're trying to sell tickets or merch a lot easier. It also makes it easier to build up familiarity with the artist over the long run. Make sure that, that audience that's already engaged, excuse me, that audience that's already engaged is, getting exposed to all of your new releases. Maybe they didn't open your last email, but, that they were interested enough to share that with you at one point. And so you're able to reach them on YouTube or on Facebook with your new music. Other data sources that are important, phone numbers. You might have heard of an app called Community, which allows you to keep track of phone numbers and text fans directly. It's a really great way to have sort of a direct connection with people. The open rates and the engagement is very, very high. One of my personal kind of gripes with Community is that you can't export the phone numbers. They have to live within community. So it's not, you don't truly own those phone numbers like you would with email. Like I can take emails to any email provider, MailChimp or other services. You can't do that with phone numbers, but it's still a very valuable data source. Social data sources. So YouTube, for example, you can create audiences out of anybody who's subscribed to your channel. You can create audiences out of anybody who's watched a video on your channel. And you can actually create and target those people with ads, whether that be on YouTube or Google Display or Google Search. So you could create, for example, an audience out of anybody who's watched one of your videos and then target them with a Google Display ad, on a website that's not YouTube. With social, you also have, your Facebook and Instagram audiences. One thing that's really important to note with Instagram is that in order to create audiences out of people that engage with your Instagram page, you have to have a business Instagram. You have to change it to a business channel. If you don't, if you have a personal page, you won't be able to target your Instagram followers or people that view your posts on Instagram. And a lot of social media is moving to Instagram. So I think it's very important for artists to know that and to use the Instagram business feature as a way to create those audiences of people who engage with you on Instagram. Pixel audiences. So you might have heard about pixels. Pixels are, if you're not familiar, a pixel is a little piece of code that goes onto a website and essentially activates anytime somebody goes on that website. And so what that allows you to do is when those pixels are connected to social platforms like Google or like Facebook or Snapchat, you can create audiences out of anybody who has visited your website or taken specific actions on that website. What's great about that is if you have your pixel on, say, a link shortener like Linkfire FFM, you can track anybody who visited those links and then retarget them, with your next song or your next album. So that's a great way of building up an audience. So I'm going to go a little bit more into pixels. We won't dig into it sort of today, but there's a lot of great resources on how to create a Facebook pixel, how to create a Google pixel, how to create a Snapchat pixel. I recommend that you go through that process and add pixels to your website, to your merch page, to any link shortener that you use. So if you use FFM, add a pixel to FFM. If you use Linkfire, add your pixel to Linkfire. And essentially, anytime somebody goes to one of those links, they will be tracked and you'll be able to create an audience out of those people and retarget them with ads later on. So that helps go through that process that we talked about earlier. If somebody discovers you for the first time and they click on an ad, they check out your song, but maybe they don't make it to Spotify. If you're tracking them on Linkfire, you can then engage that person again on the next campaign and again on the next campaign and so on. Couple things that are important to note about pixels. The Facebook pixel expires after 6 months. So what that means is that, if I visit your website and you want to target me with an ad and I don't visit your website ever again, after 6 months, I will sort of be out of that audience. Now, the way to sort of get around that is, if say 3 months after I visit your website, you show me an ad, I click on that ad and it has your pixel, then that sort of clock resets and that 6 months starts up again. So just important to keep in mind that when you're building up a pixel audience, you can't just sort of set it and forget it. You have to re-engage those people frequently enough that they're going to stay in your audience. Google is a little bit different. Their pixel lasts 540 days. So that's quite a lot of time. So you don't have to be as frequent. But just something to keep in mind that those pixel audiences do have an expiry date. So like I said, pixel on your website, pixel on your merch page, pixel on your link shortener, any sort of outbound content that you create from your social media pages, let's say you're sending people to an article that was a great article that a blog wrote about you, I would wrap that link through one of those link shorteners. So, you might have like the link fire slash, article. And instead of sending people directly to that website, you're sending them through a link fire, which then tracks them. So that, from there you can create audiences. Oh, I want to create an audience out of anybody who's, read this article on me, or I want to create an audience out of anybody who has visited my website in the last 30 days, things like that. The last thing I want to touch on in this section is ways to grow your email list. So there's a few ways. Obviously a lot of you will have sort of a space on your website for people to enter their emails. You might get some emails from there. It's not going to be sort of the most active source of email registration. So there's a few different ways you can have contests. So, merge contests where you do a giveaway and the person has to enter their email in order to enter the contest. Tour pre-sales and pre-registrations are really effective. Obviously, there's not a lot of touring right now, but when that picks up again, if you're going on a tour, I recommend that before tickets are on sale, you send people to a page where they can enter their email in order to get first access to tickets. It's a great way to collect emails. Spotify pre-saves. So there's a really great feature with some of these link shorteners that allows people to pre-save your next release. But when they do that, they can also agree to share their email with you. And what that does is Spotify will pass on the username and the email to whoever's controlling the pre-save. So that's a great way to collect emails. If you run a pre-save campaign, maybe you decide to run a contest for people who are pre-saving, your next album, and you put some ad dollars behind that. And so, that might be a way to collect a lot of emails. That's sort of a strategy I've used quite a bit. Generally just giving people like a good reason to sign up to your newsletter. If you're only using your newsletter as sort of, repurposing your social media marketing, it might, people might not care as much about sort of giving you their email. But if you make it really personal, if, you write a letter to your fans every month, if there's exclusive content that they can't get in other places, only on your email list, then that gives people, a good reason to share their email with you. Another one that is under discussed, which I think is very valuable though, is trying to get emails from promoters. So if you're playing a show and, the promoter is the one who is collecting all of the email addresses of people who bought tickets, I would recommend you speak with your agent to try and negotiate collecting email addresses as part of the deal. Having the emails of people who bought tickets to your show is probably the most valuable data source that you can get. This is the person who's the most engaged with you as an artist, the most likely to spend money on you. But if you don't have that email, you don't have a way to continue to engage them after the fact, whether that be through, album sales or merch and things like that. Are there any questions here?
So I think there's a question from earlier about COVID-19 because of the pandemic. Concerts may be out of the question. What do you consider the best online strategy?
Well, live streaming has obviously picked up quite a bit. There's online concerts, and that can also be a great way of collecting emails. Actually, there's all kinds of platforms. I must, it slowed down a little bit, but I was getting pitched like almost one new live streaming platform a week for a while. So, I'm not good. There's a lot of them out there. Their features are relatively similar. None of them have like wowed me to the point where I'm like, okay, this is the go-to platform. There's a lot of great live streaming platforms out there. And so, look into that, see if you can create an online concert. And that's another great way of collecting emails and also of engaging your fans, while you're not able to tour. I think somebody was asking about merch earlier. Do you mind just repeating that question, Omer?
Sure, yeah. 1 second. How do we set up an e-commerce funnel as a new artist where when we spend ad dollars, we can make a return? So I think it's
Yeah.
more of an ROI question.
Yeah, well,
How do we
it's a
start?
good question because I think it relates to this audience management question quite a bit.
Mhm.
Um, you know, one of the problems that I listed in the earlier part of the talk is people focusing too much on that conversion aspect before fans have gone through that engagement. And so by tracking your audiences and having kind of an audience and data management strategy in place where you're doing things like collecting emails, having pixels, you're able to retarget people over the long run and build familiarity with them, build that engagement with the artist that we talked about earlier. And so when it comes time to making that request for, I have a new T-shirt out, or I have a new merch item, or I have a vinyl that's coming out, you're not making that request to sort of a cold audience that might not be very familiar with you. You're making that request to an audience that you've engaged repeatedly over many many months, who's familiar with you, who is engaged. And so by the time you try and run those ads on those audiences, you're going to get a much higher ROI than if it was somebody that you're reaching for the first time. So it's important to think of that sort of funnel of discovery, engagement, conversion, and think about how you're moving people through each step over the long run. And advertising has a big role to play in that, but it can't be your sort of go-to. You have to warm people up and get them engaged before you make that request for them to spend some money on your project. All right, let's see next. So I'm going to go over some creative best practices here. There's a lot of stuff listed here. If it's helpful, take a screenshot of this, or write it down for yourself. This is what has come from the experience of running thousands of campaigns over many many years. You see what works, what doesn't work, what people engage with, what people click on, and so on. So, like I've mentioned earlier, people have very short attention spans. There's sort of information overload. And so it's very important to have creative assets that are, going to be able to sort of pierce through the noise and, get people to engage with your content. And so these are all things that, tend to lead to better results. Not every single time, not with every single artist, but as a general rule, these things will help have you help lead you to better performance with your advertising. So, the goal is to hook the viewer as quickly as possible. People have very, very short attention spans. They're getting bombarded with content left and right all day long. And so they're not going to watch through 30 seconds of your video to see what happens next. You have to hook them in the first couple seconds of the video. So because of that, having the chorus of your song, or having, a drop, if you make dance music, the sort of high impact, high energy moment in the first 3 seconds of your video is very, very important. I often see, especially with dance music, that's what I work with most. People will have these long, long buildups, and then the drop will come in like 12 seconds into the video. But you've already lost most of your audience by that point. They're not making it to that 12-second mark. So it's very important to hook people very, very early, with a chorus, with a drop, with kind of the high impact moment of your song. High energy footage tends to perform better. So, live footage, if, once shows come up again, or if you have footage of, previous shows that you've played, that tends to do well. Bright, colorful assets with high contrast. So things that are very colorful, very bright, tend to catch the eye a little bit more than, maybe an asset that's black and white. You often see people do black and white, or sort of grayscale footage. the eye kind of glosses over that a little bit more, and so you won't have the same kind of click-through rate. Same thing for text-heavy assets. So that requires a little bit more thinking on the person who's watching your ad. So if you have a ton of text, you're trying to get a ton of information into your video, you might lose some people that way. Let's see. Oh, assets with human faces. So this is super, super important. People are really drawn to human faces, so especially close-up faces. So, you know, if that is sort of the content that you have, you're not sure what you should edit, try and focus on parts of your video that have actual faces of people. You know, we're drawn to faces. Women tend to get higher click-through rates than men. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If there are women in your video, or if there are men in your video, you know, obviously it's don't only have women in your video just because this is on the list, but it's just something to note. You know, it tends to lead to a higher click-through rate. Trying to keep your video 15 to 20 seconds max. You know, you'll often have people who will create sort of an asset that's like a minute-long clip. Most people are not going to watch that long on social media. So 15 to 20 seconds is sort of the sweet spot. If you look at the average sort of watch times, most people don't watch past 10 seconds. So just something to keep in mind, you know, to have most of the sort of highlights of your content in the first part of the video. And then something to note is video outperforms photo by quite a lot, 2 to 3x on average. So something to keep in mind. One thing I want to do now is I'm going to show you guys a couple examples of sort of good assets, bad assets, that will, you know, maybe contextualize this a little bit more. I'm going to have to get out of this presenter view for a second, Omer, and we'll just jump back in. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll be right here on the screen. Let's see if I can jump back in here. All right. Okay, so this is a cool tool called Facebook Ad Library. You can search for ads by any advertiser. So something to maybe check out on your own end if you want to sort of look at what ads you know, other artists are using. You can just Google Facebook Ad Library, and then you can search by the advertiser name. I have a couple examples here, just in terms of what actually performs well. So this is an example by Ava Max. It's cut from her music video. I'm just going to play it real quick, and then we can go over some of the good stuff in here.
Follow the kings, had their queens on the throne. We would pop champagne and raise our toast to all of the queens who are fighting alone, baby.
All right, we don't need to watch the whole thing. Very short. So one thing to note, they have the chorus that starts right away. You know, there's like high production value, a lot of colors, a lot of contrast. So these are all things that, you know, I don't know what the results of this specific ad are, but I would expect would lead to better results than another kind of ad. I'll show you another one here that I think is probably not performing as well. Even though the song might be doing well, this specific ad might not be performing as well. And so this is an ad by Elenium. Let me just refresh the page here. So what we have here is sort of an animated version of the artwork. You know, it's nice artwork. It's a good song. It's probably doing well on streaming, but this specific asset is not the most engaging. There's not a lot of movement. It's kind of the same thing, just sort of the flashing sort of lights and you know, slight sort of playing around with the colors. And so I expect that this is probably not going to perform as well as the other asset that I showed you, which was taken from a music video where you see the artist, you know, moving around and dancing and has the chorus right from the get-go. So I'm just showing you this to kind of give two examples of, things that might be good and not so good. Doesn't mean that this is performing terribly. But I would expect that, for example, compared to this other ad that Illenium has over here, this is a different ad that's on the artist page. This is probably performing very well. And this is that live footage. So this ad, has a lot of fast cuts, very high energy. It's taken, with footage from live shows. And so this is the kind of content that is going to draw people in. It's going to lead to higher click-through rates, more engagement, and so on. Just going to go back to the presentation. Let's see here, just a moment. Oops. Oops, not this. All right. Are there any questions on this part of the presentation?
I don't see any new ones. But it was it's first of all, it's really interesting. I wasn't aware about the what you just showed, Facebook
Ad
tool.
library? Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, very cool tool. I think they actually introduced this tool because of political advertising. After the 2016 election, there's a lot of blowback on how Facebook handled things, and they wanted to increase transparency, and so they created this tool where people could see what ads people were running from any page. But it's a good way to sort of look at what other artists are doing, what other labels are doing, and maybe you can get some inspiration and see what's working.
Yeah, especially for artists, I think this is like really useful because essentially, I don't know if you guys are doing that, but a lot of times we check like a similar artist to kind of see what types of creatives they're using and what type of language they use and what kind of worlds they're kind of creating around their brand. And I think that can be very useful to utilize.
Definitely. All right. So this next slide. So putting it all together, planning your next campaign. I think, I want to touch briefly on this. Every campaign is different. There's no sort of set, way that you should do things. If somebody says, oh, this is my budget, there's not just like an automatic response of this is what you should do. Depends on your goals, depends on where you are in your cycle. It depends on the assets that you have, on what you're promoting, where your audience is. So there's a lot of factors that go in. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I plan campaigns, so that you guys can have some sort of ideas about how to run it on your end. So budget, think about, your marketing budget is going to be split over many things. Your content, press, advertising, influencer. I do think that advertising is very important because of, how easy it is to reach people, how much you can sort of retarget people and move them through that funnel as we discussed. It's not the end all and be all. Don't just put all your money into ads and think that that's like a, magic wand that's going to work for you. It has to be part of a sort of bigger marketing mix. But, starting with, the budget that you've decided to allocate for ads, then looking at what your specific goals for this campaign are. Is it to, sell tickets? Is it to sell merch? Is it to build awareness around your next release? Is it to, maybe just sort of help build your reputation through, a press piece or something like that? Thinking about what your goals are, maybe building views on a music video. Once you have those goals, then you can start thinking about what platforms you're going to be using, and that's the media mix. So maybe you have, half of your budget on Facebook and Instagram and the other half on YouTube, or maybe it's, 1/3 on Snapchat, 1/3 on TikTok, and 1/3 on Instagram stories. It's going to vary, based on some of the factors that I discussed earlier, the differences between the platforms, between, vary based on your goals and things like that. But I think it's very helpful for you to outline everything before, create an actual plan of what you're going to do. The next step you want to look at is targeting. So we talked a lot about owned audiences and sort of your core fan base and retargeting people that engage with your campaign. You also want to be targeting new people. Facebook has features like lookalike audiences, which are automatically created out of people that are similar to the people in one of your custom audiences that you've created already. You can also target people by interest, and so I'll often do similar artists, but I'll also look at interests that might be relevant sort of more broadly within music culture for that artist fan base. So, maybe festivals that they've played or that they would like to play, or that, similar artists are playing, maybe radio stations, maybe, media outlets that are relevant, maybe record labels that are relevant as well. So these are all things that, you have to think. Somebody who discovers my music and would like it would also be interested in this other thing. And so, which audiences am I trying to tap into in terms of reaching new fans? Once that's all set, you can start building your campaigns. Then you have to think about, once the campaign started, thinking about optimization. And so how do you, look at your various audiences, look at the different assets that you're using, and optimize to what's performing best. I think it's, you have to look beyond just sort of your immediate results and the cost per click, and sort of not just think, okay, well, this is the cheapest audience, I'm going to put all of my money there. You have to think about, the bigger picture, like, is this audience more on the discovery side or on the engagement side? And maybe my core audience is a little bit more expensive to reach, but it's important to move people through that funnel. And so I'm going to accept that the cost per click or the cost per view is going to be a little bit higher for this audience than for a sort of discovery audience that's hearing about me for the first time. The last thing I want to talk about is postmortem. So this is essentially looking back at your campaign once it's over, and thinking about what went well, what didn't go so well, and what would I do differently next time. And I think that's an important step that often gets overlooked. But that's how you learn, and that's how you improve every time you run a campaign, by analyzing and thinking about those results and trying to figure out ways of doing things better. That's going to lead to better assets, better targeting, all that sort of stuff. So that's sort of the last step here. And I'm just going to end it on some common mistakes. I've alluded to some of these already, but it's stuff that I see kind of repeatedly. So you might want to think about that when you're creating your campaign. So focusing too much on first level metrics like the cost per click. What is the meaning of that click? As an engaged audience, you can accept a higher cost per click than a new audience, for example. Targeting too many countries at once. So something to think about here is the way these platforms work is that they optimize for a goal, the lowest cost per click, the lowest cost per view. So if you target, let's say, every country in the world, it's going to only find people, that are clicking at a very low rate in that country. So it might lead to many impressions in countries like Mexico or India, where it's cheaper to target people. The last thing is, or the couple last things is, too many audiences, assets, and copy variations. If you have too many audiences going on, can you guys give me one moment? I just have to step out here for a quick second. Sorry about that, guys. One moment.
No worries. I'll take over 1 sec. Before we wrap up with this last slide, and if you have any additional questions, feel free. And as a reminder, you also have a one-on-one consulting session with us. If anyone's interested, you can click and book a time below. Hope you guys are enjoying this as I am. And yeah, I see already a couple of questions on the chat. When Justin comes back, then we'll address them. So another thing, this webinar is recorded, and whoever wants, we will also send a replay for you tomorrow to watch on our YouTube channel. Among other interesting webinars with people from Universal and different publishers and artist managers and experts from the industry that
So sorry about that.
No
There was
worries.
somebody at my door.
I
So
was just
back
yeah,
to
it was a short commercial break.
yeah, exactly.
Now we can go back.
So back to the sort of common mistake. So too many audiences, too many assets, too many copy variations. What this means is that a lot of people like to experiment with different things and sort of optimize their campaign. If you have too many of all of these, it's going to be difficult for these platforms to actually allocate enough budget to get a good sense of how your campaign is performing. So I would say in terms of audiences, try and limit it to like 3 or 4 different audiences to the maximum. I generally set up my campaigns, let's say on Facebook and Instagram with core fans audience, related artists, related sort of culture keywords like that, radio, press, festivals, labels that we talked about earlier, and then a lookalike. I sometimes see kind of people, create all kinds of different audiences and they want to find the absolute best one. But you have to kind of keep the bigger picture in mind and understand that, you need an audience to be big enough for these platforms to sort of work through, and find the right people in those audiences. Same thing with assets, don't create like 16 different variations that, are slightly different. Have only a handful that, might have some bigger differences between them. And then you can really understand what's working and what's not working. Having the same clip edited at 10 seconds versus 15 seconds versus 20 seconds that's not what you need to be looking at. You need to look at things like the artwork variation or a cut from the music video, or maybe a live clip, or talking directly to the camera as an artist, things like that, as opposed to like these very, very small variations. And then same thing with the copy, which is the text that you have in the ad. It can be good to test out different variations. Don't test out 20 different ones to try and find the exact one that's the best. If you do all this, you're going to have campaigns that are way too complex, way too many variations, and it's going to be hard for you to actually get a good understanding of what's working and not working. And then the last thing is splitting your budget across too many platforms. That's kind of similar to this last point that I made, is you need enough budget to get a good idea of what's working or not. If if you have $50 on Facebook and $50 on Snapchat and $50 on YouTube and $50 on Spotify, you're not spending enough money on any of these places to get a good sense of what's working. So if you do have smaller budgets, start with 1 or 2 platforms and then, build from there, as opposed to sort of trying everything and just having a very small budget on each one. And that is the end of my presentation. So if there are any questions, I'd love to chat with you guys, and we can sort of discuss a little bit more some of these points. So Omer, do you want to field them, or should I just go through the chat here? What's the best way?
Yeah, so because we're recording these sessions and afterwards uploading them, then the best way would be to read some of the questions here. So there will be a bit of context afterwards. I think, let's see. On the chat itself, we have another question. A great question is, how about SMS messaging and incorporating that into an artist audience management system, such as Superphone or Community? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I touched on this slightly. SMS is really good. It's really powerful. The engagement and the click-through rates are very, very strong. I'm not as familiar with Superphone. I've worked with Community. I like the platform. It's a great company. My only gripe is that you can't export the phone numbers. So you have to pay Community every single month to use their service. And if you stop paying, you don't have access to those phone numbers anymore, which is not the case with email. So, I think it's just something that you have to keep in mind if you're using one of these services. The engagement, the click-through rates are great. It's a very kind of intimate connection with the people that you're in your fan base, maybe more than social media or email. But just keep in mind that that community really owns those numbers. You don't.
Great. Another question. For the email list, how do you collect engaged email addresses from a cold audience?
How do you collect engaged email addresses from a cold audience? Let me just see if I understand this correctly. So this is, well, so I think, yeah, what you're trying to say is how do you get emails from new people that, haven't really heard of you before? I think this goes back to the sort of fan development funnel that I discussed earlier. If you're not going to get emails from people who haven't heard of you before, if I start running ads and try and collect email addresses, maybe I'll collect some, but it's not going to be people who are going to, engage with my music over the long run, with my project, who are going to be valuable fans. That will eventually lead to an engaged fan and a fan who's willing to convert. So what I would suggest is, using sort of these data management techniques to build up the level of engagement with fans who enter your funnel, and then, try and present an offer that makes it enticing for them to share their email, whether that be a contest or a pre-save or, a live stream, or even, just showcasing sort of the value that, the exclusive content that you have on your email. That's sort of a better way of collecting email addresses, because you want people to actually open up the emails and read them. You don't just want emails to have emails. The email is a tool for something else. It's not sort of, you're not just collecting emails for no reason.
See here, another question. Will this presentation be available for later viewing? Yes. As mentioned, I'm going to upload this to our YouTube channel and also send all of you guys a email with the link, so it will be able to be replayed afterwards. No worries about that. So Justin, I think was a very interesting, informative session, which may be a lot to process here, and maybe that's kind of a good way to kind of wrap this up. The replay will be available, definitely, to kind of go over the things and go over all the information Justin has provided us. And yeah, Justin, it's been a true honor to have you with us, and really thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge with everyone. I'm sure everyone here learned a lot. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. This was great. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and hopefully you learned something that you can apply to your own careers and to the artists that you work with. And thank you, Omer, for giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you. So you can follow me on social media, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very kind of open, and yeah, I look forward to hopefully speaking with some of you later on.
Yeah. On another note, so Justin is probably opening soon, right? Your own personal blog. So make sure to follow him when that happens. You can get updates also through the email that we'll send tomorrow with all the information. So yeah, make sure to also follow Justin. I'm sure a lot of interesting and insightful posts will be added there.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Great, buddy. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.